Hello. How's it going? Welcome.
Hey, good to see you here.
Good to see you too. Thanks for joining us here at MetaFest. How are we doing today?
Doing great, doing great. I'm joined here by Dakota. So actually, let me just update this. Marcus and Dakota. Boom.
Welcome,
Um,
Dakota.
Hey man.
yeah, awesome, cool. So I'm Marcus, Dakota, and we are both working on COHERE. Happy to give you the rundown, and I don't know to what extent this will be sort of a back and forth, but welcome any and all sort of questions. So I will let Dakota hit things off, and
Sure.
we'll go from there.
Yeah, good to be here with everybody today. Yeah, in short, COHERE is just a community of people coming together to build out a through collaboration a series of innovation hubs around the world, and through that process, creating an asset-backed token. And one of the things that we're really seeing today is like with the radical state of changes, the impetus behind COHERE is like how do we bring together leaders to build these innovation hubs around the world to create a lifestyle that's in right relations with nature, to empower local communities, and then over time create an economic model where we all collectively share ownership of a commons, and a commons that is regenerative and backed by a compliant token that allows us all to reap the rewards of our contributions into the DAO and into building out the ever-growing pool of assets.
Yeah, so I think really like the problem set that we see at COHERE is just like at the macro level. So, and especially now with sort of the state of things from a macroeconomic perspective, but one at the very meta level is like climate change, right? And like the existential sort of crisis that we're literally heading straight towards. And then the next, and the fact that, our governments and sort of the institutions that we've put in charge of addressing these issues have been completely incompetent in addressing them. So at the one hand, there's been that challenge. Then obviously there's also, all these like weird social dynamics that we're living in today's world with pandemic-induced isolation, people living in these tiny boxes in Stockholm, New York, London, paying thousands of dollars for rent, and also, steep inequality that we're seeing in the world. We're currently here in Guatemala, which is where I was born and raised. And Guatemala is one of those countries that is mired by inequality. So we have, at one point, we were the country with the most numbers of helicopters per capita, whilst also being the country with the highest malnutrition rates, the highest illiteracy rates, and the highest inequality rates. So it just speaks to how when we have these unbalanced, unequal systems, like social and political fallout ensue, as is sort of beginning to happen more and more throughout the world. And then obviously more recently, all of the sort of monetary policies that are now being bestowed upon us by these larger institutions. I mean, to what extent did any of us have a say in should the Fed increase its interest rates, right? Like, is that something that has these huge, huge consequences? Like, why are we still behest to these systems? Why are we still behest to and tied into the wider macro play? So essentially, really, the way we're looking at this with COHERE is saying, how do we create self-resilient communities that are completely autonomous, and not only that, allow people to accrue stake, as Dakota was mentioning, in a pool of assets that is regeneratively owned. So really, the sort of innovative play that we're bringing to the space is we're bridging, Web3 and blockchain infrastructure and fractalization and decentralization of real assets that a lot of different initiatives are attempting to do, none successfully because of all the regulatory hurdles that are in standing between that actually happening and your end user. And what we've done is we've spent the last year and a half polishing out the sort of regulatory infrastructure to make a fully SEC compliant token that is accessible by anyone. And that's how we're rolling this out at this point, basically. And the idea, as Dakota was saying, is like, let's bring the change makers together. I mean, MetaFest is incredible, and how cool is it that we can all tap in and connect and discuss virtually, but there's nothing like connecting IRL. We just hosted a month-long collab where we brought down together like leaders and experts across Web3, experience design, governance design, tokenomics, legal infrastructure, down to Guatemala. And we there were 25 of us, and we spent an entire month like building out the COHERE DAO. That was amazing. We are living in this beautiful home, surrounded by amazing community, moving our bodies every day, being intellectually stimulated, artistically stimulated, tons of jam sessions at night. And also just like really in-depth, sort of conversations around incentive structures and governance structures. And so we're sort of ensuring that people, as the world gets to places, as these systems continue to break down, right? We're creating sort of these spaces for people to come together, live in right relations with the earth, and more than that, not just like in a very insular way, but create the innovation hubs where we can then sort of propagate this outwardly into the communities that we're in. So that's a bit more. I don't know if you want to add anything in that.
I guess the only thing I'd add really is that like our long-term goal in this is how do we help in the most practical way go create regenerative infrastructure in as many places in the world as possible. And that's one of the pieces, there's like what Marcus is speaking to is where we're at and where like our short-term piece around building these hubs. And then ultimately it's how do we reinvent ownership entirely? Like how do we move from the tragedy of the commons into we all literally have a share in the commons. And so we actually all really have a stake in stewarding the land and coming together as a community and supporting our communities, whether it's locally or globally. And that's like a fundamental shift that we're after in the ethos around we're in it together because we are all, of course, on one spaceship Earth. And like we're in this time, I think, where we're all seeing like, holy crap, we got to work together. We have to collaborate or else it's going to be really, really hard to thrive in all the things that are occurring. So a big impetus behind this with the connecting Web3 infrastructure in IRL is that it's like how do you build an entire micro village ultimately? Well, you got to first have a really strong culture. Well, how the heck do you build a culture? Well, you have to have a really rock solid community. Well, how do you have community? Well, you have to have trust. And what's one way of building trust is breaking bread. Breaking bread together with in the collab with 25 brilliant minds. It's like at the end of that, we're family and we're in this together. And what's so exciting with the COHERE ecosystem is that everyone who came and brought their genius to the picture, they are now direct owners in COHERE. They actually have security tokens inside of this whole. So then as we build out the community in the DAO, and as we finance and build more assets, we all actually have ownership in something that is very, very tangible and real and just essential for us to move from individuals into community and then come together in these innovation hubs, which ultimately the goal of how do we create this an entire decentralized federation of these communities and how do we do that practically?
Yeah, I think, I think there's been a lot that's sort of come up around, I think largely, I'm just reading the comments here, by the way. I'm on the main stage chat. So if anyone wants to sort of like ask questions or commentary, we're super open to have like a didactic conversation here. But I mean, I think there is this whole idea of like the new nation state. Like, what is the new nation state? I think for so long, we take the nation state as being this very persistent, sort of permanent, unchanging, unwavering thing. But in reality, if you go back and you look at the history of the nation state, it's a relatively recent history in the last few hundred years. Since the Treaty of Westphalia, right? That's really when we started to see like new nation states sort of being formed and all that. So I think with COHERE, and a lot of these other sort of building projects, one of the things that we've really been exploring is what is the next iteration of this look like? And what is the next iteration that responds to the kind of matters of our time, the issues of our time? Because any constrained environment generally will create like a system of abundance, of creativity, of generation. But the way we're thinking about it is like, all right, so we're entering into these constrained environments with climate change, with inequality, with social isolation, with all these other facets. So how can we create a system whereby we're essentially enabling the new nation state to arise? So it's pretty amazing. Tommy just asked, how many Marcuses do I know? Thanks for the question. I know less than a handful. There's not a lot of Marcuses out in the world. But yeah, thanks for the question. Appreciate it. And Web3 cracks me up. Most blame religion and yet take their models wholeheartedly. That's a really interesting point, right? I mean, I think what you're trying to say is like, are we seeing this as like the end all be all sort of like model? And certainly not. I think Cohere is like one piece of the infrastructure in the wider ecosystem, right? A lot of people have been trying to figure out how are we going to bring land on chain? What does that look like? There's a lot of issues with securities that come into play here. Again, we've created fully SEC compliant tokens, and that's really the sort of like infrastructure and the innovation that we're bringing into play here. We're not necessarily like seeing this as, you know, this is it, this is the end all be all play. It's like this is what enables us to really sort of like leverage the real asset piece there.
For real. And I think the piece is like not to have hubris and to really like be like have the humility to know that we don't know shit, but we have like the opportunity to bring together leaders from around the world and in from every local place we're in to bring the minds together to actually like take the next baby step. And like I think that's like to me the thrust of Cohere is like we're just here to help provide whatever framework we can for more people to collaborate. But ideally, like, but that's certainly not in a vacuum, and certainly not with like, oh, we got the end all be all. No. What we want to contribute is like, let's bring together the leaders who are doing epic work, so then we can amp each other.
Yeah. At the end of the day, is like, are we like the issues that we're trying to address? It's not like I have the solution, Dakota does. You know, no one individual ever will have the solution. In fact, like in pluralism is where we find the most diversity and solutions sort of arising, right? And the more input, the more feedback, the more we can put our ideas out there, the more valuable that'll be. So I think just that speaks to all we're really like attempting to do with Cohere is to bring people who want to live in a new world together, who want to be able to like really shift the power dynamics that exist today and leverage, you know, cryptographic technology and information to start thinking what does like a truly decentralized society look like? How can we sort of create the fundamental bearings for that to materialize? So that's the crux of it. I see we've got a few questions. Let's see. Are you doing another meetup in Central America? Will you be in Colombia for DevCon? Yeah. So we just held our collab in May, so last month. We're going to be doing another one in September, November, still to be figured out. But you can follow us at Cohere Network, and you'll sort of be able to keep up with all the latest information. Would love to invite you guys to join us whenever that's appropriate. So, and then speaking of gatherings, I'm also helping to put together ETH Barcelona. And if anybody wants to attend, feel free to reach out to me on Discord, Marcus6697. Would love to connect with you guys in Barcelona as well. All about IRL gatherings. We got another question here. How does establishing a framework within the team? Do you do tests and vote whether it's solid, etc., before going forward? Yeah. You want to speak to like the philosophy around sort of structure and flow?
Yeah, and like frankly, it's always evolving as we're learning. But one of the things that we've been really holding in like, okay, how do we make the most effective DApp? And our hypothesis is balancing structure and flow. And so one of my co-founders, he is brilliant in graphic design and branding. And so like my opinion, you know, has to me far less weight than his opinion because he's just amazing at it. And so one of the things that we're really looking at is how do we weight decision-making based on each person's expertise? Like, so for my background is architecture. I trained at the Frank Lloyd Wright School of Architecture. I moved my practice from doing billionaire homes into impact architecture. And I've been training since I'm 12. That's a skill set that I hold. But I have less insight in other things. So we're in our DAO right now. We're really working on how do we establish that the weighted wisdom that we're holding. How the heck do we even establish that? And then how do we balance flow and flexibility such that we have enough of a roadmap so we know where we're going, but then it's informed by all the co-creators who are coming together are motivated to build the thing out. So
yeah, I think just to like add on to that, I mean, I've been a part, and I'm sure many of you here have been a part of DAOs that are, especially when we're trying to like achieve these huge goals, it can be really hard to work within a DAO like framework, because what happens when you're trying to, you know, put together an event or build a physical infrastructure. How do we do that? How do we do that in a very material way, whilst also like allowing the community to be sort of like input holders in that process as well? So, we're now, we've just brought on a governance design lead that's going to be developing out the COHERE DAO, who's developed, design governance frameworks for 30,000 different stakeholders, all at once. So we're super excited about having her come on board, because she's thinking about sort of like the foundational principles is, one, creating like a pluralist vision where a multitude of perspectives are taken into account. That's obviously a given in this space, but also thinking about a meritocratic system and society as far as like, how are we, just because you've bought an NFT on OpenSea doesn't necessarily mean that you should now get to decide on like these really big decisions, right? So rather what we want to do is establish the sort of the rails through which the community will essentially say, okay, because you've done XYZ, we now believe you're a valuable like contributor, and your input in, social impact is really valuable. So we want to like give you that sort of like role. Because and I think there's been so many discussions around moving away from one token, one vote, et cetera, et cetera. We're really thinking about like, how do we establish meritocratic systems that value you for your unique genius, right? And say, okay, your input is super valuable because you've proven that to the community, and we can track that all on chain. And there's a whole sort of conversation here around decentralized identities and verified credentials, and now most recently sold on tokens. So, but that is 100% what we're thinking about, for sure. And yeah, as far as DevCon, ideally I would like to go, but we'll see how everything unfolds. Yeah. Like I said, super happy to take any further questions from you guys. Perhaps as those trickle in, like I can speak to a little bit of like other projects in the space that are bridging. I think there's, especially now as we're entering this bear market, right? Like amazing time to build. The space gets really quiet. All the really valuable stuff is ultimately going to be what sort of perseveres and comes up to the top in the next run. I think for us, really,
Oh, I think we might have lost. I think we might have a connection issue. I cannot hear you yet. Almost. You're definitely frozen. Yeah, I believe they are trying to resolve their issue. It looks like connection. One of the things that they mentioned was sharing in the commons and building a connection to IRL micro villages. So that was one of the things that really stuck with me, is that they traced the connections and building connections such as breaking bread to trust and building trust in a community, and then having that community form that helps build culture. So that kind of journey of how trust moves to build the larger hub and share and the growth really stuck with me. Do you think you can talk a little bit more about how we can use that culture and like that, like the seed from the connection, and how to carry that through all those kind of layers? Sorry, you're muted right now.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I feel like one of the things that occurs for me is trust and human connection ultimately, and I think that's the common thread. And it's like when we really like, I don't mean to be too esoteric, but it's like I feel like one of the major issues of like depression right now in the world is like there's all these crazy things happening, and it's hard to feel empowered to be cause in the matter. So like actually be able to shift from the game A to the game B. And I think when we have clarity around the superordinate goal, that's like, okay, we're in this shitty situation and we have this vision over here, and we actually know that we can if together, that to me then becomes like this really powerful bond between people where we all start to really get each other's back because we know what we're doing together. We know where we're headed together. And that, like a community of people who've got each other's back to then build out the most important things that we need to thrive, food, water, and community. Like, to me, to us, I would say that is the gold. That is the gold of the area. Because the biggest portfolio you want, give actual physical gold, but if you don't have food, water, and community, it's really hard to have a quality life. And so it's like, if we see that by improve to ourselves through action, that by coming together, we actually have a pathway to building that, then it grows a family, and it grows these deep connections that bring us through every stage of the evolution towards that end.
Yeah, and how do we propagate that further? I think like culture is sort of this symptom of relationships and trust over periods of time that are celebrated. And so I think that's really the idea is we're creating a culture here, even having like a certain sort of arrangement of pixels on as your PFP is super valuable and like sort of speaks to something. But like, how are we gonna? So now we're sort of getting to this point of how are we gonna transcend that culture? How are we gonna gather physically? That's why all these gatherings like DevCon, ECC, ETH-X, are super valuable because they're ultimately saying to us like, hey, human connection at the end of the day is the most important thing. And so that's like scalability wise, I think is like gatherings and sharing and creation of common culture is super, super important. And I think at like the fundamental level within that is saying, what's the North Star? What is the guiding North Star for the culture which we're creating? And like, what are the values upon which we're building? Because without that, you don't really have the foundation to create that culture, to create the trust. And it might be that like increasing the number of dollars in your bank account are your values. Like maybe that's what's important to you. But is that ultimately what's going to be like, does that give you long-term satisfaction? Like that's for you to decide. And that's for you to sort of like come up with an equation for us, like the values that we're setting, and they may not resonate with everyone. Is like, as Dakota was saying, is like we really want to ensure people feel that there is a space where they can create, where they can innovate, where they can build a better world. Not only that, accrue long-term value. So that sort of speaks to that point a little bit, and just like on a bit of a tangent, total tangent, but along the line of values and valuations, like with these, with the falling markets now, I've been thinking about like, isn't the entire idea of what we're building to no longer like be tied to this war-backed, debt-backed, exploitation-backed token, the dollar? Isn't the idea to move away from that? Like why is everyone sort of losing their minds over this? And it's like, well, because you still got to buy your groceries with dollars, you still got to do this with dollars. Like our system is far too dependent on the dollar, and so we're essentially creating that off-ramp for you to say like, oh cool, I have everything I need. And it's also not, explicitly tied to this US dollar token. So I think that's like sort of the key piece that we're trying to bring into the space here. Yeah, and yeah, that's kind of the thought there. Yeah. So we've got about 5 minutes left. Would love to, if there's any other further questions, Hacker House, convention villages, we need our own physical infrastructure and communities for sure. Yeah,
and a big piece of it too with the collapsing of the mainstream market is how many people now have a lot of free time in all the layoffs just in the Web3 space. And now there's all these people with incredible skills who have a lot of debt, and often cases are in shitty, like overpriced cities. So how do we actually bring people together and bring your genius together in the Web3, but then in the physical as well? Like, how do we actually create that space to come together and come out here and build with us physically and build these things out and actually have a stake of ownership there through? And that's the piece around a big missing, in our opinion, since the 60s with community development, is that someone can come and be a farmer, bring some of the most important skills, but never get actual stake of ownership or any liquidity. And so with the Cohere ecosystem, when someone contributes to building out the system, you get a long-term stake. And that we feel that's such a critical piece. And it's not a speculative token. It's actually we've tokenized the shares of Cohere directly. So you actually have a share of the value of the real asset pool. And that becomes what's more valuable than bringing in and co-creating a new way of living, and then having that contribution codified in ownership that then has liquidity and the transferability. And then you help build out a global decentralized network of regenerative villages. We're not trying to sustain anything, we're just building a new world. And then let's do that, and like do it in a really practical step by step. And that's what COHERE is really attempting to do, is really lay out a roadmap so that we can bring ourselves together, from builders to developers, and actually create these things in a timely manner.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, the one reflection I was going to share before our internet kind of got a bit spotty is, I had a friend who he lives in this huge metropolitan city, pays thousands of dollars in rent, and pays he told me he paid $20 for a bagel the other day, and I was like, dude, that's insane! Like $20 for a bagel. And so it's like, why don't we sort of shift away from like living in these super extractive cities, right? That are literally the sort of turning points of the extractive societies. Like there's just like, go to work, earn your money, go shop, go spend, and then don't accrue any long-term value because you're paying all your money towards your rent. So we're just trying to shift the sort of energy systems here in order to flow them towards what we believe to be like really fundamental sort of aspects within sort of the new system that we're creating. I just went ahead and shared in the guest shill links chat the Gitcoin, the Gitcoin link, as well as COHERE's Twitter. Roadmap wise, an update on our end, what we're up to. So we raised capital through a crowdfunding campaign, which went really well. We've raised some pre-seed capital. We just got into a really exciting accelerator. I can't share yet which one that is, but yeah, some exciting announcements coming there soon. So make sure you're following us to sort of stay up to date there. And then we are going to be, we're building out a site down here in Guatemala. We're currently leasing this property now. That's sort of 5 homes around the courtyard pool. And we're going to go check out some more land today, which is sort of a beautiful mountain set avocado farm, 14 acres, really epic. So if you're interested in living, in community and doing great, meaningful things with your lives, regenerating the earth, really would encourage you to, follow us on Twitter, hop in the Discord, and looking forward to building alongside you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That's super cool. So I know avocado farms are usually built on hills. Is that true for this place as well?
It's got both like a hilly section and some flat areas, and it's got already like 10 cabins built out. And
dude, it's sweet.
Yeah,
it's super sweet. And and there's some really Marcus here has a construction company in Guatemala that they just developed this technology through a couple grid accelerators called Laminapo. And it's a really cost-effective way that we can build affordable homes for the local community, and they have been. And we're also going to be employing that technology, that building technology, in our sites here. And so that's another really sweet sister organization.
Awesome. Yeah, I know it's specifically the avocado farms too. Like a lot of the work is done naturally, right? So the avocados will fall off and kind of roll down the hill, and that's one of the ways that you can save a lot of energy collecting them. So that's why they do that. Super supportive of these hubs that you guys are setting up, and the villages. Definitely people should dedicate parts of their lives to supporting and giving back to communities. I love that, building trust and carrying it through. So thanks so much for all the work you guys are doing, both locally for your communities and abroad generally. So supporting ETH Barcelona and all over the world. So, that's part of education and building up responsible people around the world is educating them. So thank you so much for teaching people and building these spaces for them.
Thank you guys for setting the space. Super excited to connect and collaborate further. So appreciate the time.
Excellent.
Have a good one, guys.
Cool. Take care, everyone.
Take care.